How you doing? This is Will from Will Development, and this is part 3 of why your stones are off. The number 3 reason in my mind why your stones will be off is poor concrete working practices. Everything from how much water you're using to how you're settling it inside of your mold. All of these things culminate to create problems with your stones. Forget the weight of the stone being off. The actual quality of your stone will be affected if you don't use good concrete working practices. For my purposes, generally speaking, I use 5,000 psi concrete. I find that it cures stronger, and I've never had a stone break on me, at least an Atlas stone that is. And I find that the yield value of it is still such that it's not so bad. There's a lot to know about concrete. You can't just jump right into it and start playing with it and think you're gonna get it right the first time. You might get lucky, but odds are you won't. There's so many different weights of concrete. There's so many different types of concrete. There's so many different additives, different manufacturers, and there's a lot to consider before you start working with it. Personally, not endorsed by them by the way, happen to use 5,000 psi concrete manufactured by the Quikrete Corporation. As far as I know, Lowe's is the only hardware store in my area that carries it, and the other big manufacturer of concrete is Subcribe. Now, I don't really particularly like their 5,000 psi concrete. It's just a preference thing, but I find that their aggregate is a little too rough, and it's hard to actually get the stone to come out smooth. I've used them in the past. My preference, again, is Quikrete brand. I find the workability is a little bit easier. Now, why use 5,000 psi concrete? Why not just buy the cheapest stuff you can find? And you know, on the surface, it's a good idea. If you buy the red bag by Quikrete, which is only 3,000 psi, you're actually gonna come out with a heavier stone because it's denser packed, the aggregate's a little bit bigger, and the workability is just about the same as the 5,000 psi concrete. It really is. The reason is because it's gonna take a lot longer to cure and be stronger. You're gonna be leaving it in the mold a lot longer, and the risk of it dusting or cracking when you drop it is much higher. It's not curing at as a high temperature as, say, 5,000 psi concrete, or even 5,500 psi. And that's not to say you can't use 3,000 psi concrete. If you do, I recommend you add some sort of strengthening fibers to it, even some sort of acrylic additive that will help it cure stronger and maybe just stick to itself better. Additives. When I make stones out of 5,000 psi concrete, I've learned that you really don't need to add anything to them. As long as you accurately mix it and cure it, it'll be just as strong as anything. It'll be the strongest stone you can make. That being said, you still need to make sure you're mixing it properly. I'm not about to tell you to go out and buy a concrete mixer. I don't even have one, and I make stones as a side, quite a few might I add. And I've got along just fine by mixing it in a wheelbarrow, using my own muscle, and a shovel. Works just fine. But I do understand that some people don't really know what properly mixed concrete looks like. Now, I could give you a visual representation of it, but the problem with that is in different climates, different weathers, it's gonna be different. I can't just tell you this is what good concrete looks like, because if it's more humid outside, you can probably get away with a drier concrete, even in a stone mold. Or if you're in a drier climate, you could probably get away with a wetter concrete. In fact, you'll probably need it a little bit wet. That being said, the best guideline I can give you without a visual representation is to simply mix the concrete, slowly adding water. 9 out of 10 times, about 1.25 gallons of water is enough for an 80-pound bag of 5,000 psi concrete, Quikrete brand anyway. And how do you know if you have a good mix? Well, odds are if you've worked it for about 5 to 10 minutes with a shovel, you're gonna have it very well mixed thoroughly. Some other things that help is as you're turning it into itself, take the shovel and tap into it, sort of making cut marks through it. Pick it up, flip it over, fold it into itself again. How do you know when it's wet enough and not too wet? If you take a paper towel, you should be able to touch the concrete with it while still wet and pull the paper towel off. The paper towel shouldn't be soaked. It should show signs of staining from the concrete. You can even do this with your hand. If you touch it, your hand shouldn't be soaked. It should be damp and show signs of staining. Some of the pieces of concrete, the cement, should be sticking to your hand or paper towel. And this is a good representation that you have a pretty good mixture for any climate, whether it's too hot, too humid, too cold, or too dry. There's a bit of a misconception when it comes to mixing concrete. Some people seem to think it's sort of like dirt. It's It's like wetting dirt and then letting it dry. It doesn't do anything. Concrete is actually a chemical reaction. It requires a proper amount of water with a proper amount of concrete. And if you have too much of one or the other, the mixture will not properly adhere to itself, and it will cause a poor quality product. Much like baking, it's chemistry. And if you don't do the chemistry right, guess what's going to happen? Dusty, shitty, broken stones. Now in the next episode, I'm going to talk about putting the concrete in the mold, proper practices for that. So be sure to stay tuned for that. Practice good concrete, and if you don't, then what's your excuse?